Thank you, everyone. Welcome to another webinar by As We Go, our Global Migrations Research Center. Today we are going to host Dr. Kerstin Schmidt and from Bielefeld. Hello. And she's going to tell us about the changing categories and paths of migration to Germany. And of course, this year we are remembering the 60th anniversary of Turkish migration to Germany, which is a very established migration. We're talking about fourth generation now, but also recently, of course, the European Union, but also including Turkey and Germany are flooded by Ukrainian refugees fleeing from war. And so we're going to see what are these different categories, what are the migration, what about the identity issues, for example, among the incoming refugees, but also, long-time immigrants in Germany, since Germany is a very important country when it comes to migration trajectories. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Kerstin, and but I would like to give the voice to Aysima first, our assistant, to introduce you, to at least to read your short biography. Thank you again.
Thank you, Professor, and good morning, everyone. We are very happy to have Dr. Kerstin Schmidt today. Now, let me give you a little background on her research. She's a lecturer and researcher at Bielefeld University in Germany. In the Faculty for Sociology, she teaches MA and BA seminars in English and German. She has received her master's degree from the University of Cologne in 2005 and her PhD degree from Sussex University in 2012, with a thesis in which she developed a conceptual and methodological approach to the climate change migration nexus and empirically investigated the potential impact of climate change on existing migration patterns in Mexico. Dr. Schmidt is currently interested in exploring the consequences of the legal and social categorization of migrants. Other research topics of interest are the transnational perspective on migration, migration and related policies in Germany, international development, and the social dimensions of global environmental change, particularly migration in the context of climate change. For more information about our research, you can visit As We Go website. Now I'd like to give the floor to you, Professor. Thank you for listening and welcome again.
Yes, thank you very much, Shebnem and Aysima, for the very kind introduction and for the invitation. And I'm very happy to be with you and just to see you again after a while, actually, although it is in an online format. But I think this is a great way of keeping in touch. And as you said in the introduction, Germany has kind of experienced some changes throughout the last years and decades in its immigration patterns. And actually what I try to do today is to focus a little bit on the question where we are going now. So I think I brought maybe more questions than answers to you, but I'm looking forward also to a discussion with you. So let me share my screen with you. I hope you can see this. And so, okay, so what I wanted to do a little bit today with you is talk a little bit about the question what migrant categories are, because this is one of my topics of concern or interest in the last years. And I think that the recent immigration by Ukrainian migrants or refugees, that's the question, we will, I think, this will kind of affect those discussions in a particular way. And then let me give you a little bit of a background of Germany as an immigration country, what Shebnem already mentioned in the beginning. Of course, the history of Germany as a reception country for labor migrants, mainly from Turkey, but also from other Southern European countries after the Second World War. And then we will see a little bit what happened after. And of course, the focus on the recent developments of forced migrants from Ukraine and Germany. And I think that would be kind of a good starting point maybe for a discussion. So let me start with the topic of categories. So what are basically categories? Categories are kind of used to put objects, but in that sense also people into particular frames. So categories are basically used for us to understand, what's going on in the world. If you see what, I don't know, what an apple is or what a pear is, you can easily kind of refer to a group of things that have particular characteristics, that have that maybe if they're people who behave maybe in a particular way, who are assigned particular characteristics also from the outside world. So what we usually do in migration studies, we kind of frame particular people in a particular way, maybe according to the origin countries, according to the according to their purpose of stay in a country, according to the visa category they have, according to their level of education, for instance. So that's kind of the logic behind those categorization or those social categorization processes, if you like. And this is somehow also reflected, somehow, but not completely, also in the legal migrant categorizations. So also states, governments of states use categories to assign particular rights to entry, regulations of entry, regulations on stay, maybe what people are allowed to do in a particular context, in a particular country, to people. And this is usually kind of established by the governments of destination countries. And usually the categories are designed in a way that they relate to a particular purpose of stay. So for instance, they're labor migrants, it's the purpose of working in a country. They are international students, they get a student visum. Maybe later this can be transferred into a working visum. Family reunification can be a purpose. Protection, humanitarian aspects, I think that's the main categories. And that results usually in different rights. So rights of entry, there's usually a preference of certain categories over others. So we're talking about high-skilled people, international students, who are usually preferred by governments. But also kind of the idea of protecting humanitarian rights, which has been a big discussion in Germany since 2015, since many people arrived from the Middle Eastern countries, mainly Syria, but also other countries in Germany. So and those categories affect, as I said, the rights of entry, but also the rights during the stay. If you can work, study, bring family members, and how long you're allowed to stay. So just as an overview, maybe again, the legal categories that I somehow just mentioned. So this is mainly the categorizations according to the purpose of stay. So labor migrants, there's usually a little distinction between high skilled and lower skilled, with a preference of the higher skilled, usually international students, family migrants, and displaced people. And then the question comes into play also what is kind of accepted as a reason for displacement, if kind of governments recognize that someone should be kind of protected as a refugee or as an asylum seeker or not. So that leads to some impacts, of course, of legal categories on the migrants. It has kind of, as I said, those kind of legal effects in regards to the rights to stay in a particular country or the need to leave that country. But it also usually frames people in a particular way. So public discourses, media discourses, policy discourses are shaped in a particular way. And also in academic research, we as researchers, we use categories because otherwise it would be difficult to study. If I don't know, if you wanted to write your PhD thesis or an article or kind of a project proposal about just migrants, and the question first is, who's a migrant? So then in the end, you end up writing something about people, no? Which is nice, which would be the kind of the ideal world. But somehow in terms of kind of shaping categories for analysis, you need to kind of classify people. So you need to talk about, I wanted to research, for instance, what international students from the US experience in Germany as opposed to national German students, for instance. Then you kind of categorize those people as international students because they come to study in Germany from a particular country. Or you wanted to kind of compare, I don't know, labor migrants from Turkey with labor migrants from Greece in a particular context, or I don't know, German nurses in a particular context in comparison to people from other countries. So somehow usually those categorizations follow the logic of, as I said, the purpose of stay, the level of education, or the kind of nationality or ethnicity. So that has kind of, this is of course helpful for kind of an analysis. Somehow we need to know what we're talking about, what is our subject of research. On the other hand, often also different strands of the academic literature do not really speak to each other. So for instance, there's a lot of literature about academic mobility, which has not been kind of recognized as migration in the past. There has been this big divide between labor migration and refugee studies, which is, I know how it is in Turkey, would also be a topic of interest, because Germany has this tradition actually of, when we talk about migration, we very often mean in the academic context integration. It has been kind of the classic study about migrant integration in the context of those labor agreements, people arriving to work in Germany. So the idea was to study how do people kind of interact, how do people integrate, what makes people stay, what makes people return or move on. That's somehow the classical approach, I would say, in Germany. Whereas, and then of course we started to have some different ideas, talking about kind of rejecting those integration terms, kind of talking about linkages between the destination and the origin countries in the context of transnational studies and so on. And very recently, actually after the arrival of the refugees in 2015, we had kind of a shift towards refugee forced migration studies also, but still there's kind of this gap of who researches what and so on. So there's not so much communication between those two fields also, and the same kind of in the UK and US context. And of course, as researchers, when we use these categories to kind of talk about our field of study, there's also the danger of actually repeating and reinforcing those those perceptions, those social categorizations and perceptions that people have about particular categories of migrants. So that was maybe a bit, just to set the frame for for what I would like to discuss. So I would like to talk about two examples for migration to Germany, namely the high-skilled migrants. And this idea started in the end of the 1990s, early 2000s, that Germany suddenly realized, okay, there's actually a lack of highly educated people. We need skilled people in the sense of nurses, yeah, but also specialists like IT people, engineers, and so on. So there was this idea of attracting people to Germany, and so what was then discussed was we should become more restrictive, and this is kind of a development that can be observed in many countries, but particularly also in Germany. And what was discussed was we should become more restrictive, or we should stay restrictive towards immigration. But what happened, in fact, was that immigration policies became more selective. So we tried to open, Germany tried to open for high-skilled migrants, but tried to restrict immigration of lower-skilled migrants, in the sense of this idea of hunting for global talents and so on. Those are some key terms from the time. And Germany, then there are different systems to attract high-skilled migrants. So for instance, the European Union Blue Card, or Germany had the Green Card, which was kind of, I think, used by 300 people or so. So very few people actually wanted to come to Germany, surprisingly, in this context. Because, there are different reasons. So many high-skilled people consider Germany not as really attractive as a country to stay because of the language. Many people, I don't know, from India, from China, from Turkey, also high-skilled people, they preferred English-speaking countries. And they often thought, okay, they don't really get the kind of the networks, the support that they might need for their further careers. So that's, kind of somehow, the system somehow, failed a little bit, so to say. But those high-skilled migrants often framed as highly mobile people. And mobility is often termed kind of something desirable in modern societies. And under this term of mobility, we also had a lot of immigration, for instance, from European countries, which is also called not so much migration, but mobility, surprisingly. So people coming from Italy, from Spain to work in Germany as high-skilled, often as high-skilled people also. This is also kind of framed under this term of mobility, and not so much under the term of migration, whereas migration somehow refers to lower skilled people coming from third countries, such as, I don't know, African countries in the German context, of course, some Asian countries also. So let me move to the second example, which is also very interesting, of course, in the German case, namely the case of the forced migrant, which has become, of course, as I said, interesting or kind of relevant for Germany after the inflow of people from the Middle East, mainly from Syria, from 2015 on. Here also we have in Germany different categories. So for instance, those who are defined as refugees under the Geneva Convention. Maybe you know the 1951 Geneva Convention, where persons who are displaced owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted, or kind of who are persecuted for particular reasons of their religion, nationality, political opinions, and so on, and who cannot search for protection in their own country, they should kind of be accepted as refugees, which Germany did to some extent. Germany also has kind of a law to protect asylum seekers apart from this convention, but that somehow implies that one enters Germany without having been in another country before, which could have protected them, which is kind of impossible if you're kind of surrounded by peaceful countries, and most people just cannot board a plane and come to Germany. So that might only be the case, for instance, when you enter with another visum, with another kind of visum as a student, for instance, and then you kind of ask for asylum. And of course, Germany has some ways of protecting people who are from a country which is kind of receiving temporary protection under the status of subsidiary protection, and the non-refoulement principle to countries which are considered not safe. So what we see in the media is that refugees, as opposed to those high-skilled people, are very often framed in different ways. Once with this idea of, okay, those people are supposed to settle, so we need to integrate them, as opposed to the high-skilled people, actually. So there's a lot of more, or there's much more kind of offer for language courses, for integration programs for refugees, for displaced people, than it is for high-skilled people. Reception distribution frame, who is responsible? That was the big discussion in the some years ago about when so many people arrived at the same time, how should they be distributed within Europe, but also within Germany? Then this idea of danger, no, this idea of threat. Many people with bad intentions are coming. So of course, mainly by the tabloids, by some kind of right-wing groups. But also discussions about the economics. Is it beneficial? Who will pay the costs? And how about the economic aspects of receiving people? Another one, which is kind of obvious, is this idea of, okay, from a humanitarian perspective, we are a country that should protect people who are in danger. And then also those debates of, okay, how can we kind of deal with this idea of we need to protect people, but we cannot receive so many people, and this idea of secularization. How can we protect our borders while we try to be kind of follow this idea of humanitarian. Being a humanitarian country, being a humanitarian kind of continent also as Europe. How can we follow this? Somehow also this idea of, okay, this is people who suffered a lot, we need to help, which kind of takes away a little bit of the agency also of people. And on the other hand, relating a little bit to the economization frame, how can we integrate those people into the labor market? For instance, there were, as a little kind of anecdote maybe to this, when the refugee inflow started in 2015, 2016, actually in Germany, I was a little bit surprised by this development, or by the kind of the enormous impact of this development. So at the time, I was doing some research into high-skilled people in Germany, and there was a lot of political interest. There was a lot of kind of interest in this. In the question, how can we attract people, high-skilled people, and how can we make them stay in Germany? As I said, that was a little bit of a trouble at the time. How can we kind of actually attract the people that, as the German government at the time, we wanted to have in Germany? And while I was doing that, somehow I realized, okay, this interest was kind of getting kind of decreasing, because everyone was focusing then on the inflow of humanitarian migrants. And then after this first questions of, well, how can we receive the people and what can we actually do to protect them, then the questions came up, okay, how can we maybe use those people to fill our labor market shortages by offering kind of classes for Syrian women to become a nurse, for instance. So kind of this idea of, okay, how can we economically also make use of this migration? Yeah, maybe as a little kind of summary of what happened politically. I mean, of course, we had the as we already mentioned, of course, in the 50s, after the Second World War until the 1970s, the opening for labor migrants, but that was still in a kind of in an atmosphere in Germany where politicians and also many people had the idea, okay, this is temporary migration. This is people arriving and they will kind of do their work, but they will not stay, of course. So this is something that affected politics a lot, also in the name. I mean, in the German term of Gastarbeiter, which is kind of a highly contested, highly questionable term, of course, reflects this idea of, okay, this is guest workers, people will come, they will move. And this was actually the case until still in the 80s. As you see, the first quote on the left by the former Secretary of Foreign Affairs in Germany, Friedrich Genscher, who said, "We are not an immigration country because of our size as a country and because we are so, because of our high population, we cannot be an immigration country. So we need to kind of restrict the access or the inflow of people into our country." And that was kind of the course of the government until the end of the 90s, as I previously said. Then government kind of realized, okay, but we might need some workers from with a higher skilled backgrounds. So they established this green card. They tried to attract people with a green card to come to Germany to bring their skills to the German labor market. And here we have this very famous quote that said, okay, instead of bringing, so there was some opposition against that. So some people said, okay, instead of bringing people from other countries, we should train our new generations to actually be able to fill those positions. And then we had, as a complete surprise, to be honest, for me, came this, came the idea in 2015 by Angela Merkel that we should, receive more people, humanitarian migrants, that we should be, that we should develop the so-called welcome culture, which was at the time also very kind of maybe the word of the year, kind of where people really were willing to receive people, where people were kind of willing to change. And that was also the time when politicians for the first time started to say, okay, we are actually an immigration country. You see that here in 2015, this is in a newspaper where Angela Merkel actually said that when she was talking to citizens, we should kind of face reality, finally, that Germany is now an immigration country, which it has been for a very long time, of course, but this kind of political recognition came actually quite late. So just some numbers, and you see here how immigration kind of reached a little peak in the early 90s, and that's actually, as we will see later, caused by the inflow of humanitarian migrants from former Yugoslavia who came to Germany at the time. Then it kind of decreased a little bit. And we have this very little increase in the end of the 90s, early 2000s. That was kind of the high-skilled people when Germany opened for high-skilled people, but you can see it went somehow down until it increased and then peaked for the first time in 2015, 2016. Then it decreased quite a bit, which is of course related to the pandemic, when also the borders were closed, so it was very difficult to get a visum. And here you can see the asylum applications, starting in the 1950s and until, this is figures from, I think it was February 2022, from the German Federal Agency for Migration and Refugees. And you see how the numbers, how the asylum applications decreased, and how this is now kind of developing again in the context of the Ukrainian refugees. So let's move a little bit, and this is now kind of how to say, this is now kind of more questions than answers, as I said before, about Ukrainian forced migrants in Germany. But I think it's worth to maybe in the last, and I will stop in the last 5 minutes to maybe have a little reflection on this, and then maybe we can discuss it together. So what happens? Of course, after the invasion of Russia into Ukraine on 24th February, and 6th of April, that was when I put together this presentation. So that's 2 days ago. So there's more than 1 million of people in total displaced. There have been 310,000 arrivals from Ukraine documented in Germany in this time frame, but the exact numbers are not known, because Ukrainians can just cross the border. So with the Ukrainian passports, they can use the train, for instance, for free. This is like a train ticket. There is no need to get a visum to enter Germany or the European Union in general. There is, some people arrived by buses, by cars. In the early days, some people also had friends who came to pick them up. So it's very difficult to really have the exact numbers. So they did. The following numbers are therefore based on a survey. I think it was few thousand people that the federal ministry did in Germany. So I think it's kind of approximations also. I wouldn't take it completely for granted, but I think it shows a trend, and it's kind of intuitive also when you look at the numbers. So it says that 84% of the displaced people from Ukraine are women, and 58% are displaced with their children. So I think that reflects the fact, of course, that Ukrainian men are forced to stay in the country to defend the country by the Ukrainian government. So they're not allowed to leave the country, except when they're over 60 years old. So who is mainly leaving is women with their children. And very often the case is also that women who can leave the country do so to protect their children, to bring their children out of the country. But women who have no children sometimes also decide to stay, to also fight to defend the country, or because they don't want to leave their family members alone. But when children are involved, the decision is often taken that the women at least try to bring the children out of the zone of danger. So that kind of explains also their average age. This is kind of a good average age for women who have children, of course. More than 90% were working or studying in Ukraine, which kind of reflects the general profile that Ukraine had this very high employment rate of women also. 42% of them arrived in a big city, mainly in Berlin, and there were rumors actually going on, and there's actually a warning on the website of the federal ministry saying that it's not true that you can only register in Berlin, that they can register anywhere, but this is kind of, yeah, sometimes not well known, or sometimes, of course, also people move where they have friends, maybe to places they visited before, maybe where they think they can easier get employment and so on. For instance, in Bielefeld University now we have the gym is now prepared to receive refugees as a kind of temporary measure, of course. So yeah, so they will be hosted by the university, which is yeah, of course helpful, but yeah, but also only a temporary solution. And there's a lot of support activity going on, as it was actually in 2015, 2016 already, that people from the civil society decided to host, to welcome people in their homes, that people decided to bring food, hot beverages, toys for the children, medical support to the people from Ukraine who just arrived. So about their perspective of staying, 42% said that they wanted to stay, whereas 32% wanted to return as soon as possible, and the rest does not know yet. Of course, that doesn't reflect what will happen in the future, but it kind of shows us the kind of the intentions or the ideas with which people come here. So briefly, differences to what happened in the context of forced migration from Syria in 2015. I mean, the obvious thing is it's nearby, so it's in a sense much easier. I mean, of course, it's a context of a flight. It's a horrible situation. No? I'm not saying it's easy. But it's not people who have to cross the sea or to walk thousands of kilometers through the forest to reach Germany. So it's people usually kind of boarding a train, a bus. There's this free train tickets, as I said, and they just come to Germany and register, try to find a place to stay, try to find kind of a place where they can register, where they can kind of stay for some time. There's a law that Ukrainian citizens can enter the European Union without a visa and move freely within the EU member states of the Schengen area. That means also people arriving to Germany, they can then move on if they have friends, for instance, in other European countries or relatives. And that, of course, is also happening a lot. I mean, of course, before the war, there were also many Ukrainians living in Europe already. People joining their family members, same as what is happening in Turkey, what you mentioned previously. So there's this free choice of place of arrival in Germany. So people can arrive where they like to arrive. They can stay where they like to stay. That was completely different in the Syrian refugee case, where people were kind of forced to, or they were distributed kind of according to the numbers of inhabitants of particular regions in Germany, and kind of the economic profile of this region. So there's a particular kind of way of calculating how many refugees can come to a particular region, and they were just sent to this region, at least for the first years. Then, of course, when they found jobs, people could move, but this is kind of a restriction that was kind of in place, which is now not in place. And of course, what I said before, the personal characteristics are different of gender, age, And of course, something that that also plays with it, that the way of how Ukrainian people are somehow perceived. Kind of, they were very nearby of joining the European Union. They might kind of in some years they might join the European Union. They were kind of perceived by parts of the population as kind of more similar to the mainstream German population, which is kind of problematic in the sense of, again, how people are framed, in this context. They're not really kind of framed as refugees, but kind of framed as being people, who fled a war zone, who came to Germany, yes, but not in the sense of, kind of the sense of being a threat, of being very different from the mainstream population in Germany. And I think this is something that's interesting to watch in the future, what this will do with the kind of perception of forced migrants, of refugees in Germany, if we get this kind of two class of forced migrants or not. And this also relates to the question of what happens to people who are non-Ukrainian citizens, because you need a Ukrainian passport to enter Germany. What about people from other countries who lived in Ukraine with a visa, for instance, as a student, as a worker, and who then became displaced and who couldn't really return to their countries, but who also cannot really move to Germany? And there were some kind of scenes at the borders of the European Union also, where people were rejected because they didn't have the Ukrainian passport. So there are no restrictions in the access to the labor market. Yesterday, the German government decided that people from Ukraine will receive the basic support, same as unemployed German nationals receive from June on. So that's about 800 support of about 800 euros. That depends a little bit on the personal situation, if there are children involved, and so on. So this is kind of the basic maintenance, and people can join the labor market, and they will be supported by the job center also to find a job. They have access to healthcare, which was also different from what happened in 2015 to the refugees from Syria. They only had in the first months kind of the right to access the very basic healthcare, and only when they entered the labor market they have the same or the access to the full healthcare like the German nationals also. So we will see. I think I will, given the time, I think I will stop here. But I think that leads to many questions regarding the question of what will happen to the Ukrainian displaced people, how will be the framing, what will this kind of arrival of Ukrainian people, what will it do to migration to Germany in general, what the perception of refugees and migrants, and what will it do kind of also to the question of categorizations of migrants. So I will stop here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank